The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Fallujah as Marine Corporal Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. At 24, she had already completed 2 tours in Iraq, but something about this particular patrol felt different. The intelligence reports had been conflicting, and the usual chatter from local informants had gone silent. Her squad of 8 Marines was tasked with checking on a suspected weapons cache in a residential district that had been quiet for weeks. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Texas where her father ran an auto repair shop and her mother taught elementary school. She joined the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that she could handle anything life threw at her. Her fellow Marines respected her not just because she was tough, but because she genuinely cared about getting everyone home safely. She had a habit of memorizing details about each person in her unit, from their hometown to their favorite foods, believing that knowing your people made you a better leader. The patrol moved methodically through the narrow streets, their boots echoing softly against the concrete. The neighborhood appeared abandoned, with metal shutters pulled tight over shop windows and no children playing in the usual spots. Sarah's instincts, honed by months of combat experience, told her something was wrong. She signaled for the squad to slow their advance and take extra precautions. The building they were meant to search stood 3 stories tall, its white walls scarred by bullet holes from previous battles. As they approached the entrance, Sarah noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust and cigarette butts that couldn't have been more than a few hours old. She made the decision to call for backup, but before she could reach her radio, the world exploded around them. The ambush came from 3 directions simultaneously. Automatic weapons fire erupted from rooftops, windows, and doorways, turning the quiet street into a deadly maze. The insurgents had planned this carefully, using the Marines' own tactics against them. Sarah dove behind a concrete barrier as bullets chipped away at the wall inches from her head. She could hear her squad members shouting positions and calling for medical assistance. In the chaos, Sarah saw Private Johnson, barely 19 years old, caught in the open with no cover. Without thinking, she sprinted across the street under heavy fire, reaching him just as a burst of gunfire caught them both. She felt the first bullet tear through her shoulder, spinning her around. The second hit her in the chest, and she knew immediately that her body armor had saved her life. But the insurgents kept firing, and she kept moving, dragging Johnson toward safety even as more rounds found their mark. By the time she managed to get Johnson behind cover, Sarah had been hit 11 times. Her left leg was shattered, making it impossible to walk. Blood soaked through her uniform in multiple places, and she could feel her strength draining away with each heartbeat. But she was still conscious, still fighting, and still trying to coordinate her squad's response to the ambush. The firefight continued for nearly 2 hours. Sarah used her radio to call in air support and coordinate with other Marine units in the area, even as her vision started to blur from blood loss. She watched helplessly as 3 of her squad members were killed in the extended battle, including Private Johnson, the young man she had risked everything to save. The weight of their loss hit her harder than any of the bullets. When the shooting finally stopped and the insurgents melted away into the urban landscape, the surviving Marines found Sarah barely conscious, but still clutching her weapon. The medics worked frantically to stabilize her, but her injuries were severe. Multiple organs had been damaged, and she had lost an enormous amount of blood. The closest medical facility was a field hospital 15 miles away, but the roads were too dangerous for a standard medical evacuation. As the medics prepared her for transport, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. She kept asking about her squad, wanting to know who had made it and who hadn't. When they told her about the casualties, she broke down completely, blaming herself for not seeing the ambush coming sooner. The weight of command, something she had carried proudly for months, now felt like a crushing burden. The journey to the field hospital became a nightmare when their convoy was forced to take shelter during another firefight. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate, and the medics weren't sure she would survive another hour, let alone the additional delays. They made the difficult decision to leave her at a small outpost with limited medical supplies, hoping that a helicopter evacuation might be possible once the area was secured. But the situation in Fallujah was deteriorating rapidly. Multiple units were under attack across the city, and air support was stretched thin. The small outpost where Sarah lay fighting for her life was effectively cut off from the rest of the Marine forces. The handful of Marines stationed there did everything they could to keep her stable, but they lacked the equipment and expertise needed for her critical injuries. As night fell on her first day at the outpost, Sarah made peace with the possibility that she might not see another sunrise. She dictated letters to her parents and her younger brother, telling them how much she loved them and how proud she was to serve alongside the Marines who had become her family. She talked about the Marines who had died in the ambush, making sure their stories would be remembered and their families would know how bravely they had fought. The pain was constant and overwhelming, but Sarah refused the morphine that might dull her awareness. She wanted to stay alert in case the insurgents found their position. Even in her weakened state, she insisted on helping plan the outpost's defenses, drawing on her knowledge of enemy tactics to suggest improvements to their security. The other Marines were amazed by her determination and leadership, even as her body was failing. Dawn brought little relief to the isolated outpost where Sarah clung to life. Her second day began with spiking fever and infections setting into her wounds. The small medical kit at the outpost contained basic supplies, but nothing adequate for treating multiple gunshot wounds and the complications that were developing. Corporal Williams, the senior medic at the station, had done everything he could, but he watched helplessly as Sarah's condition continued to decline. The outpost itself was nothing more than a reinforced building that had once been a small shop, surrounded by concrete barriers and sandbags. 8 Marines held the position, and they had been operating with minimal supplies even before Sarah's arrival. Now they faced the additional challenge of caring for a critically wounded soldier while maintaining their own security in hostile territory. Communication with headquarters remained sporadic due to equipment damage from the ongoing fighting throughout Fallujah. When they did manage to get through, the responses were always the same. Medical evacuation was impossible due to heavy enemy activity, and ground transport was not an option. The Marines at the outpost began to realize they might be on their own for an extended period. Sarah's moments of consciousness became less frequent, but when she was awake, she remained focused on the mission and her fellow Marines. She had memorized the radio frequencies and call signs for units throughout the area, and she used this knowledge to help coordinate communications when their own equipment failed. Her tactical expertise proved invaluable even as her physical strength continued to fade. During her lucid periods, Sarah shared stories about her squad members who had died in the ambush. She talked about Private Johnson's plans to propose to his girlfriend when he returned home, and how Sergeant Rodriguez had been saving money to buy his parents a house. These weren't just casualties to her. They were friends whose dreams and aspirations had been cut short. She made the Marines at the outpost promise that these stories would reach the fallen soldiers' families. The infection in Sarah's wounds spread rapidly in the hot, dusty environment. Her fever climbed dangerously high, and she began experiencing delirium. During these episodes, she would sometimes think she was still in the middle of the firefight, calling out warnings about enemy positions and asking for status reports on her squad. The Marines learned to play along, giving her the responses she needed to hear to keep her calm. Corporal Williams worked around the clock to manage Sarah's care with their limited resources. He had received basic medical training, but nothing had prepared him for treating injuries this severe under these conditions. He improvised continuously, using torn clothing for bandages and rationing their small supply of antibiotics. Every decision felt like a gamble with Sarah's life hanging in the balance. On the second afternoon, the outpost came under direct attack. Insurgents had finally located their position, and began probing their defenses with small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The Marines had to choose between defending their position and continuing to care for Sarah. Without hesitation, Sarah insisted they focus on the defense, even though moving her to a safer location caused excruciating pain. During the firefight, Sarah's tactical knowledge once again proved crucial. Despite her weakened condition, she was able to identify the insurgents' likely approach routes and suggest defensive positions that maximized the Marines' effectiveness. Her insights helped them repel the attack with minimal casualties, but the effort left her completely exhausted. As night fell on her second day, Sarah's vital signs became increasingly unstable. Williams wasn't sure she would survive until morning, and he began preparing the other Marines for the possibility of losing her. They had all grown attached to Sarah during their short time together, inspired by her courage and dedication, even in the face of death. But Sarah surprised them all by rallying during the night. Her fever broke temporarily, and she became more alert than she had been all day. She used this time to record a final message for her family, speaking clearly despite her physical condition. She wanted them to know that she had no regrets about her service and that she had been surrounded by heroes during her final days. The message also included instructions for Williams and the other Marines. Sarah had been thinking about their situation and had developed a plan for improving their communications with headquarters. She knew that their current position was unsustainable and that they needed to find a way to signal for extraction. Her plan involved using materials from their limited supplies to create a more powerful antenna that might reach friendly forces. Working through the night, the Marines implemented Sarah's communications plan. Their efforts paid off when they managed to establish contact with a SEAL team that was operating in their area. The SEALs had been conducting reconnaissance missions throughout Fallujah, and they were the only unit with the capability and authorization to attempt a rescue in such dangerous territory. The news that help might be coming gave everyone at the outpost renewed hope, but Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate. She had now survived far longer than anyone had thought possible with injuries this severe, but her body was reaching its limits. The infections were spreading and her blood loss had been massive. Williams estimated that she had perhaps hours rather than days left. Sarah spent her remaining lucid moments preparing the Marines for her death and the arrival of the SEAL team. She wanted to ensure that nothing would interfere with their extraction, even if she didn't survive to see it. Her primary concern remained the safety of the Marines who had cared for her, and she insisted that they prioritize their own survival over any attempt to save her. As dawn approached on what would be her third day at the outpost, Sarah slipped into unconsciousness. Her breathing became shallow and irregular, and Williams wasn't sure she was still aware of her surroundings. The Marines maintained their vigil, checking her pulse regularly and doing everything they could to keep her comfortable during what they believed might be her final hours. The SEAL team's estimated arrival time was still several hours away, and Williams wasn't confident that Sarah would survive that long. Her body had endured trauma that should have killed her days ago, and her continued survival seemed to defy medical explanation. The Marines began to wonder if sheer determination and force of will could keep someone alive when their body had given up. The SEAL team moved through Fallujah's dangerous streets like shadows, their specialized training and equipment allowing them to navigate territory that other units couldn't safely traverse. Led by Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chen, the four-man team had been conducting reconnaissance missions in the city for weeks, gathering intelligence on insurgent activities and identifying high-value targets. Chen had received the emergency communication from the isolated Marine outpost late on Sarah's second night. The request for medical evacuation under fire was exactly the type of mission that SEAL teams trained for, but the location and circumstances made it extremely dangerous. The outpost was deep in hostile territory, surrounded by insurgent strongholds, and accessible only through streets that had been the sites of multiple ambushes. The decision to attempt the rescue had not been made lightly. Chen's commanding officer had initially denied the request, citing the high probability of casualties and the limited strategic value of the mission. But when Chen learned about Sarah's condition and her extraordinary survival, he personally advocated for the mission. Something about her story reminded him of his own sister, who was serving as an army medic in Afghanistan. The SEAL team spent several hours planning their approach to the outpost. They studied satellite imagery, consulted with other units that had operated in the area, and developed multiple contingency plans for different scenarios. Their greatest challenge would be extracting a critically wounded soldier from a fixed location while under potential enemy fire. Chen's team consisted of specialists with complementary skills. Petty Officer Rodriguez was their medic, trained in advanced trauma care that far exceeded anything available at the outpost. Petty Officer Thompson was their communications expert, capable of coordinating air support and extraction assets. Petty Officer Lee was their demolition specialist, prepared to blast through any obstacles that might block their path. The team began their movement toward the outpost before dawn on Sarah's third day, using darkness and their night vision equipment to avoid detection. They traveled light, carrying only essential gear and medical supplies for Sarah's treatment. Every piece of equipment had been carefully selected for its necessity, as they would need to move quickly once they reached the outpost. As they approached the target area, the SEALs could see evidence of the fighting that had raged throughout Fallujah. Buildings showed fresh damage from rocket attacks, and several vehicles had been destroyed by roadside bombs. The neighborhood around the outpost appeared deserted, but Chen knew that insurgents could be watching from hidden positions. The team's radio intercepted communications, suggesting that insurgent forces were planning another attack on the outpost. This intelligence added urgency to their mission, as they realized they might arrive just as another firefight was beginning. Chen made the decision to accelerate their timeline and approach the outpost more aggressively than originally planned. When they reached the perimeter of the outpost, the SEALs found the Marines in a defensive posture, expecting an imminent attack. The Marines had detected movement in the surrounding buildings and were preparing for what might be their final battle. The arrival of the SEAL team provided immediate relief and hope that had been absent for days. Rodriguez immediately took charge of Sarah's medical care, bringing capabilities and supplies that the outpost had lacked. His assessment confirmed what Williams had suspected. Sarah's survival was nothing short of miraculous. Her injuries should have been fatal within hours, but somehow she had held on for nearly 3 days. Her pulse was weak and irregular, but she was still alive. The medic began emergency treatment procedures while the rest of the team prepared for extraction. Sarah required immediate surgery and blood transfusions that could only be provided at a full medical facility. Every minute they remained at the outpost increased the risk for everyone involved, but moving her too quickly could kill her instantly. Chen established communication with their extraction assets, coordinating with helicopter crews that would need to land in hostile territory under fire. The landing zone would be a small courtyard adjacent to the outpost, barely large enough for a medical helicopter and exposed to potential enemy fire from multiple directions. The extraction would require perfect timing and coordination. As the SEALs worked, insurgent forces began moving into position around the outpost. Intelligence intercepted radio chatter indicating that this would be a major assault designed to overwhelm the Marine position. The insurgents apparently knew about the rescue attempt and were determined to prevent it from succeeding. Rodriguez stabilized Sarah as much as possible under the circumstances, but her condition remained critical. She had regained consciousness briefly when the SEALs arrived, recognizing that help had finally come. Her first words were about her fallen squad members, asking Chen to ensure that their families received her messages about how they had died. The helicopter extraction faced multiple challenges beyond enemy fire. The weather had deteriorated, with strong winds and dust storms making flying conditions dangerous. The medical crew on the helicopter would need to perform emergency procedures during flight, working in cramped conditions while under potential attack. Chen made the decision to begin the extraction as insurgent forces moved closer to the outpost. The Marines and SEALs would need to provide covering fire while Sarah was loaded onto the helicopter, exposing themselves to significant risk. Everyone understood that this might be their only chance to save her life. The helicopter approached under cover of close air support, with fighter aircraft providing suppressive fire against insurgent positions. The landing was executed perfectly despite the dangerous conditions, with the aircraft touching down for less than 2 minutes while Sarah was loaded aboard. Rodriguez accompanied her on the flight, continuing treatment during the journey to the nearest trauma center. As the helicopter lifted off, insurgent forces launched their assault on the outpost. The Marines and remaining SEALs fought desperately to hold their position, knowing that Sarah's survival depended on keeping the landing zone clear. The battle continued for over an hour before air support finally drove off the attackers. Sarah underwent emergency surgery immediately upon arrival at the medical facility. The surgical team worked for nearly 8 hours to repair the damage from her multiple gunshot wounds and treat the severe infections that had developed. Her survival was still uncertain, but for the first time in 3 days, she had access to the full resources of modern medical care. The story of Sarah's survival and rescue spread quickly throughout the military community in Iraq. Her determination to keep fighting despite overwhelming odds inspired soldiers throughout the region. The Marines who had cared for her at the outpost were recognized for their dedication and courage under impossible circumstances. Chen and his SEAL team received commendations for their successful rescue mission, but they deflected praise to Sarah and the Marines who had kept her alive. They understood that their technical skills and equipment had been important, but Sarah's survival was ultimately a testament to human will and the bonds between soldiers who refused to abandon each other. Sarah spent several months recovering from her injuries, undergoing multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. She was eventually medically retired from the Marines, but her experience in Fallujah shaped the rest of her life. She became an advocate for wounded veterans and worked to ensure that the stories of soldiers like those who died in the ambush would never be forgotten. Years later, Sarah remained in contact with the Marines who had cared for her at the outpost and the SEALs who had saved her life. They had become an extended family united by their shared experience of survival under impossible odds. Her story became a reminder that sometimes the most important victories are measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in lives saved and promises kept.